Greetings from India. My name is Shivani Chaudhry and I'm the Executive Director of the Housing and Land Rights Network based in Delhi. I'd like to share some of the challenges faced by homeless persons in India as well as what's being done on the issue and some suggestions in order to move forward. The census of India in 2011 recorded about 1.8 million homeless persons in India in both urban and rural areas. However, independent experts believe that about 1% of the urban population, or close to 4 million people, are homeless in urban areas. While the incidence of rural homelessness is also high, it's more concealed and thus more difficult to document. India thus has a very large homeless population, but it's not homogeneous. It comprises single women, single men, women with children, transgender persons, and families who live in extremely inadequate conditions. However, there is no official disaggregated data on the homeless population. India is estimated to have the world's largest number of homeless children. However, we do not have data or a national policy to address their specific vulnerabilities and concerns. Just in Delhi in 2018, a survey documented over 70,000 children living in street situations. Homeless women and girls suffer the most from the absence of secure housing, and they are specifically vulnerable to gender-based violence, including sexual violence, rape, and trafficking. However, again, we do not have specific mechanisms to address their concerns and provide housing solutions for them. State response to homelessness has largely been in the form of providing shelters. It does not look at the structural causes of homelessness and why homelessness is increasing in India. While a large number of people migrate from distressed conditions in rural areas to urban areas, we also find that there are a large number of families who have been living in cities for generations, for decades, but they are so deeply entrenched in the cycle of abject poverty that they are not able to access affordable housing or adequate housing. And thus this phenomenon of intergenerational homelessness is something that is of great concern to us in India. Homeless people who live on the streets and in precarious locales across the city are homeless for various reasons, but largely because they cannot afford even any form of basic shelter in the city because it's just too expensive. We find them suffering from various human rights violations. Largely, they suffer from poor health. Homeless persons have a much higher rate of mortality and morbidity than the normal population. And this is also largely linked to their lack of access to adequate food, healthcare, water, sanitation, and thus they suffer from malnutrition. Women and children are amongst the most vulnerable, and so are older persons and persons living with disabilities. We also find homeless people being criminalized and targeted by the police and harassed greatly. As I was mentioning, the state response has largely been in the form of shelters, and in 2014 the central government introduced a scheme of shelters for the urban homeless under the National Urban Livelihood Mission. So this scheme lays down guidelines and standards for developing shelters for different kinds of homeless people across the country. However, it's not being implemented properly. Even though there is money allocated for the scheme, a large amount of funds are unspent or being diverted, and most Indian cities are grossly underserviced in terms of shelters, and the living conditions in the few shelters that exist are also extremely inadequate. Now, Delhi, where we work, is one of the best in terms of its response to homelessness. Delhi has about 200 shelters for homeless people, including temporary and permanent shelters. And this has largely been a result of a very strong civil society movement. Of course, we do have a sensitive government that has implemented some of these measures, but there is a strong forum called the Urban Rights Forum with the homeless that has been working very closely with the government and also assisting the courts. And we have been fortunate to get some very progressive orders from the High Court of Delhi as well as the Supreme Court of India that has resulted in improved living conditions for homeless people. However, despite the high number of shelters in Delhi, only 10% of the homeless population is covered. So the vast majority are still living out on the streets and suffering, from the extreme heat, cold, rain, and thus they are dealing with very severe health problems. The forum has also worked very hard to help homeless people access entitlements. And a major challenge faced by homeless people across India is that they do not have a permanent address. So whenever they try to get any kind of government document, they are asked for address proof, which they cannot furbish. And this excludes them from various schemes that also exist, for vulnerable and the urban and rural poor. So the Urban Rights Forum with the Homeless has been working closely with the Election Commission of India to get them to recognize that wherever homeless people live is their address. And through this campaign of sensitization, we have managed to get over 15,000 homeless people in Delhi voter cards. So this also makes them politically visible and, fulfills their right to political participation. So this has been a good success, and the campaign has brought together people working on different dimensions of urban poverty and homelessness in Delhi. At the Housing and Land Rights Network, we really believe in the human rights approach to addressing homelessness, and we have been advocating for solutions along a continuum of housing rights. So we believe that shelters are just the first emergency humanitarian response, but shelters cannot be a permanent solution. So we are advocating for a range of solutions, such as hostels for working homeless people, for working men, working women. We are calling for short stay homes for people recovering from chronic illnesses. We are asking for recovery and rehabilitation centers for women fleeing situations of domestic violence, because a large number of women are on the streets because they are escaping situations of violence but have nowhere to go. And then we're asking for social rental housing. So the government really needs to invest in rental housing, provide subsidies for homeless people, which would be also more economically feasible in the long run. And ultimately, we're saying that homeless people must have access to finance in order to access permanent housing for those who want to own housing. So we do need a range of solutions. And we have intensified our demand for adequate housing for the homeless through a campaign that we launched on the 2nd of October last year. This marked the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, and it was also the occasion of World Homeless Day on 10th October. And we've put together the demands of homeless people across Delhi. We've been organizing public meetings, community meetings, and we've reached out to over 5,000 homeless persons. As part of the campaign, people have been writing postcards to government officials. Children have actually designed postcards and written their dreams for better education and housing and sent these to the government. A petition signed by over 1,000 homeless people has also been sent to the Chief Minister. So there is a great movement where people are coming together to advocate for their rights. And we want the state to understand that homeless people are rights holders, and the state is bound by national and international law to fulfill their right to adequate housing. And this campaign is continuing, and we're hoping for some achievements by the end of 6 months. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure that people have adequate housing, but also better social protection measures. And the majority of homeless people are working. However, they do not have a stable income because they're largely in the informal sector and they often cannot find work. So we are calling upon the state to initiate some form of a scheme for employment guarantee for the urban poor, especially the homeless population. And when they're not able to find work, to also provide them with some unemployment allowance so that they don't fall further into poverty and starvation and hunger, which also then increases their mortality rate. We're also calling for better insurance schemes for them, social security for women and other homeless marginalized groups. We're asking for disability insurance, health insurance, and free access to healthcare. While government institutions do provide free medical aid, their medicines are very expensive, and very often people are not admitted because of the stigma of being homeless. So we're calling for better sensitization, better linkages with community healthcare system, so they have access to improved healthcare and a social security net. We also find homeless people vulnerable to accidents because they live on the street, and we find that they do not get compensation, and they also do not have access to legal aid and justice. So we need free legal aid for them, and we need improved mechanisms to help them access the formal justice system. Ultimately, our struggle is really to promote the right of everyone to live with dignity, and homeless people are at the margins of our society. They suffer the worst human rights violations and are the most marginalized. So we really call upon states to work with civil society and other sectors to ensure that the human rights of homeless people are protected. And in this regard, we'd like to also bring in examples from other countries where policies like Housing First have worked. And we are really pleased that the Commission is taking up this really important issue, and we're looking forward to recommendations and the outcomes from this session of the Commission, and also to building greater global solidarity to address these very important issues so that homeless people are able to live with dignity across the world. Thank you very much.